A 60-year-old virgin paid 25 cents for the most feared mountain man, and his plans shocked everyone. The dusty saloon roared with laughter as a gray-haired woman was mocked. Not worth a penny. But then, boots struck the floorboards. The town's most dangerous man slammed down a single silver coin. The room fell silent. Everyone expected terror. Instead, he offered her dignity. By lamplight in a lonely mountain cabin, his scars told a story of blood, betrayal, and a family stolen by the railroad. Yet whispers in town claimed he was a killer. The law came with chains, the church with shame, and a child's hungry eyes begged for a home. Now the woman no one wanted must decide: stand beside the monster everyone fears, or walk away forever. The trial bell tolls, the jury leans in, and the crowd holds its breath. Was he truly the villain the railroad painted, or the only man brave enough to fight them? And will her single quarter buy disgrace? Or a redemption that changes everything? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The saloon's usual din of clinking glasses and boisterous chatter fell to a hush as Claudine Wells stumbled forward, pushed by her cousin's rough hands. Her cheeks burned hot with shame as she found herself standing on the makeshift auction block, really just a weathered wooden crate that usually held whiskey barrels. "Step right up, gents," her cousin Thomas bellowed, his voice thick with mean-spirited glee. 25 cents for this fine specimen. Never been touched, guaranteed pure as prairie snow. The words cut through Claudine like knives, each one a fresh wound to her already battered dignity. The crowd's laughter rolled through the room like thunder. Claudine kept her eyes fixed on the rough wooden floorboards, watching drops of spilled beer seep between the planks. Her plain brown dress, sewn by her own careful hand, suddenly felt like it was made of thorns. She fought to keep her hand steady, clasped tightly at her waist. "Ain't worth 2 bits, someone shouted from the back. "Wouldn't take her for free," another voice added, triggering fresh waves of cruel laughter. Thomas grabbed Claudine's arm, making her flinch. "Come now, surely someone needs a cook. She can bake a fair pie. I'll grant her that." His grip tightened painfully. "Though you might need to reinforce your kitchen floor." More laughter erupted, and Claudine wished the ground would open up and swallow her whole. The town's banker, Mr. Whitmore, raised his glass in mock salute. "Better add the cost of feed to that quarter, Thomas." His refined accent made the insult cut deeper somehow, coming from someone who should know better. Claudine's other cousin, James, circled the crate like a carnival barker. 25 cents. That's all we're asking for this fine. He paused dramatically. Investment opportunity. The saloon girls watching from the stairs didn't join in the laughter, but they didn't speak up either. Claudine caught sympathetic glances from a few of them, but sympathy without action was cold comfort indeed. The heavy doors of the saloon creaked open, letting in a shaft of late-afternoon sunlight that cut through the tobacco smoke like a blade. A massive shadow filled the doorway, and the laughter died in several throats as Sandro Bear Claw Boone ducked his head to enter. The mountain man's presence changed the very air in the room. He moved with the deliberate grace of a grizzly, his scarred face partially hidden beneath a thick beard streaked with gray. His buckskins bore the wear of countless seasons in the high country, and a knife handle worn smooth as riverstone protruded from his belt. Claudine had heard whispered stories about Sandro Boone. Some said he'd killed 3 men in a fight over gold. Others claimed he'd gone native, taking an Apache wife before she was murdered by railroad men. The only thing everyone agreed on was that he was dangerous, a man best left alone. He paused just inside the doorway, his dark eyes taking in the scene. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring as he reached into his pocket and withdrew something that glinted in the dim light. The silver quarter rang like a bell as he slapped it down on the bar. "Sold," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Thomas's face went slack with surprise, then twisted into an uncertain smile. "Now hold on, Boone. This here's just a bit of fun." "I said sold." Sandro's words carried the weight of mountain stone. "Unless you're saying your word ain't worth 25 cents? Color flooded Thomas's face. He looked to the other men in the saloon for support, but found none willing to meet his eyes. Even Mr. Whitmore suddenly became very interested in the contents of his glass. James tried to salvage the situation with a forced laugh. "Come now, Boone. Surely you don't." "The lady's waiting." Sandro cut him off, gesturing toward Claudine with a massive, scarred hand. Claudine's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked up at last, meeting Sandro's gaze. Instead of the mockery or lust she expected, she found something else in those deep-set eyes, something that might have been kindness or at least respect. Her legs trembled as she stepped down from the crate. The distance to the floor seemed suddenly vast, but before she could stumble, Sandro's hand appeared at her elbow, steadying her. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands that looked capable of bending horseshoes. "Much obliged," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sandro nodded once, then turned to face her cousins. "The lady will be needing her things." Thomas sputtered, "Now see here. All of them." Sandro's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "I'll wait while you fetch them." The cousins exchanged glances, then James hurried out, returning minutes later with Claudine's carpet bag and a small trunk, all she had in the world. She'd been living in their back room since her father died, earning her keep with cooking and mending. The other patrons watched in stunned silence as Sandro easily hoisted both pieces of luggage. He turned to Claudine and gestured toward the door with a slight bow that somehow contained no mockery. "Ma'am?" Claudine gathered what remained of her dignity and walked toward the door, her head held as high as she could manage. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, marking each step of what felt like the longest walk of her life. Just before they reached the door, Sandro paused and turned back to the room. "Much obliged for the opportunity, gentlemen." His words carried a weight that made more than one man shift uncomfortably in his seat. "I trust there won't be any more auctions." The door swung shut behind them with a decisive thud, leaving Claudine blinking in the bright afternoon sunlight. A wagon stood waiting, the horses stamping impatiently. Without a word, Sandro secured her belongings in the back, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. As she settled beside him, Claudine's mind raced with questions and fears. What would become of her now? Had she traded one form of humiliation for another, perhaps worse? Yet something in the careful way Sandro handled her belongings, the quiet respect in his manner, made her wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, this strange turn of events might lead somewhere other than shame. The wagon creaked into motion, and Claudine found herself leaving behind the only life she'd known, headed toward an uncertain future with a man whose very name made people speak in whispers. Her hands twisted in her lap as they passed the last buildings of town, the familiar streets falling away behind them. "You afraid?" Sandro's question came so quietly she almost missed it over the wagon's noise. Claudine considered lying, then decided truth was all she had left. "Yes," she admitted, "but I reckon I'm more afraid of what I'm leaving than where I'm going." Sandro nodded as if this answer satisfied him. "Fair enough." He clicked to the horses, guiding them toward the mountains that rose like purple shadows against the western sky. "We've got a ways to go before dark. Try to rest if you can." Claudine sat straight-backed on the hard wagon seat, watching the town shrink behind them. The weight of others' mockery, carried for so many years, seemed to grow a little lighter with each turn of the wheels. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her heart. The late afternoon sun painted the prairie grass gold as the wagon rolled on, carrying them toward those distant mountains and whatever fate awaited them there. Claudine Wells, who had never thought to have an adventure at her age, found herself starting one at last. Purchased for 25 cents by a man whose fearsome reputation was already at odds with the careful gentleness she'd witnessed. The wagon swayed beneath them, and a meadowlark song carried across the prairie wind. Claudine closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the strange lightness in her heart. Whatever came next, she knew this moment marked a turning point in her life. One that had begun with the ring of a silver quarter on a saloon's scarred wooden bar. The saloon's floorboards creaked under Sandro's boots as he stepped toward Claudine. His weathered face remained calm, but his eyes held a fierce determination that made the surrounding men step back. With surprising gentleness, he wrapped one massive hand around Claudine's trembling arm. "This way, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the whispers and snickers that rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back of the room made a crude sound. Another voice called out, "Careful there, Bearclaw. She might break your bed." Claudine flinched at the words, her cheeks burning with shame. But Sandro's grip remained steady, neither tightening in anger nor loosening in embarrassment. He guided her toward the door with the same careful dignity he'd shown since stepping into the saloon. "Pay them no mind," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "They're not worth the breath they waste." The setting sun struck them full in the face as they stepped outside. Claudine blinked against the golden light, her eyes still adjusting from the saloon's dimness. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn's chill, making her wish she'd brought her shawl, but it lay forgotten in her cousin's house, along with most of her other belongings. Sandro led her to where his horse stood tethered beside a sturdy pack mule. The horse was a tall bay gelding, well-muscled but gentle-eyed. The mule was loaded with supplies, sacks of grain, tools, and what looked like trading goods. Claudine's heart pounded as she realized the full weight of her situation. She was alone with a man whose reputation inspired fear throughout the territory. Whatever his show of gentility inside, she had no guarantee it would last once they were away from witnesses. She pulled back slightly, and Sandro immediately released her arm. He turned to face her, keeping a respectful distance. "Miss Wells," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I want you to understand something. I only stepped in because what they were doing wasn't right. You don't owe me anything." Claudine wrapped her arms around herself, trying to still her trembling. "Then why did you do it? Why spend even 25 cents on someone like me?" Sandro's scarred face softened slightly. "Because every person deserves dignity, ma'am. What they were doing in there..." He gestured back toward the saloon. "That wasn't about you. That was about their own mean spirits." A gust of wind swept down the street, stirring up dust and making Claudine shiver. Sandro noticed and began unbuckling his coat. "Please," she protested, "I couldn't." "You can and you will," he said firmly, holding out the heavy leather garment. "Night's coming on and it gets cold up in the mountains." The mountains. Claudine glanced toward the towering peaks that dominated the western horizon. Is that where you mean to take me?" Sandro nodded, still holding out the coat. "I've got a cabin up there. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid and warm. I could use someone to keep house, cooking, mending, that sort of thing, if you're willing." He paused, then added carefully, "Or I can take you wherever else you'd like to go. The choice is yours." Claudine studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but his expression remained open and honest, his eyes meeting hers steadily. "You mean just as a housekeeper?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Just as a housekeeper," he confirmed, "nothing more than that unless you choose otherwise. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door. I give you my word, for whatever that's worth to you." Coming from most men, such a promise would have meant little, but something in Sandro's manner, the quiet dignity with which he held himself, made Claudine inclined to believe him. And what real choice did she have? Her cousins had made it clear she was no longer welcome in their home. She accepted the offered coat with trembling fingers. The leather was warm from his body, and the weight of it felt oddly comforting as she pulled it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. Sandro nodded once, then turned to his horse. "Ever rode before, ma'am?" Claudine felt her face flush. "Not since I was a girl." And I wasn't. I wasn't quite so heavy then. "Horse can handle it," Sandro said matter-of-factly. "He's mountain-bred and strong. Here." He laced his fingers together, creating a stirrup with his hands. "Step in, and I'll give you a boost." Claudine hesitated, remembering all the times she'd been mocked for her size. But Sandro waited patiently, his expression free of judgment. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her skirts and placed her foot in his cupped hands. It wasn't graceful. She struggled and wheezed, and at one point she was certain she would fall. But Sandro's strength never wavered. He supported her weight steadily, guiding her up until she settled in the saddle. Not once did he grunt or complain about her heaviness. Once she was seated, Sandro adjusted the stirrups to accommodate her, then checked the cinch. Satisfied, he took the horse's reins in one hand and the mule's lead rope in the other. "You comfortable up there?" he asked. Claudine nodded, though in truth she felt precarious and exposed. The saddle seemed impossibly high off the ground, and she couldn't remember the proper way to hold the reins. "I'll lead him," Sandro said, as if reading her mind. "You just hold on to the saddle horn and try to move with his motion. We'll take it slow." The sun had nearly set by the time they left town, painting the sky in deep purples and golds. Claudine felt the stares of townspeople as they passed, heard the whispers behind cupped hands. But Sandro walked steadily onward, seemingly oblivious to the attention. As darkness settled over the land, stars began appearing overhead. First just a few bright points, then dozens, then hundreds. The moon rose, nearly full, casting enough light to see by. Still, Sandro lit a small lantern and hung it from the mule's pack, creating a pool of golden light that moved with them. They traveled in silence for the most part. The steady clip-clop of hooves, the creak of leather, and the gentle jingling of the mule's harness created a rhythm that Claudine found oddly soothing. The night air grew steadily colder, and she pulled Sandro's coat tighter around herself, grateful for its warmth. After what felt like hours, Sandro spoke. "Cabin's just ahead, see that light?" Claudine peered through the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but shadows. Then she caught a glimpse of something flickering, a warm glow between the trees. As they drew closer, she made out the shape of a substantial log cabin nestled against the mountainside. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, and lamplight spilled from 2 windows. A small barn stood to one side, and what looked like a garden plot stretched behind it. "Someone's there," Claudine said, suddenly nervous. "There's a light." "That'll be Martha Twohearts," Sandro explained. "She comes by sometimes when I'm in town, keeps an eye on things. She's good people. You'll see." They approached the cabin slowly, giving Claudine time to take in more details. The structure was larger than she'd expected, well-maintained with a proper roof and glass windows. A covered porch wrapped around 2 sides with a bench and several chairs visible in the lantern light. As they drew up to the hitching post, the cabin's door opened. A native woman emerged, her silver hair caught back in a long braid. She wore a mix of Western and traditional clothing, a calico dress under a beaded leather vest. "You're late, Sandro," she called out, her voice warm with amusement. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in town." Then she caught sight of Claudine, and her expression shifted to one of pleased surprise. "Ah, I see you didn't come back alone." Sandro helped Claudine dismount, supporting her weight as her stiff legs threatened to buckle. "Martha, this here is Miss Claudine Wells. She's going to be keeping house for me if she's willing. Miss Wells, this is Martha Twohearts, my nearest neighbor and oldest friend." Martha stepped forward, her dark eyes kind as she took in Claudine's nervous state. "Welcome, Miss Wells. I've got coffee hot on the stove, and there's fresh bread if you're hungry. Come inside where it's warm and we can get properly acquainted." Claudine glanced uncertainly at Sandro, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on in," he said. "I need to see to the animals anyway. Martha will help you get settled." Still wrapped in Sandro's coat, Claudine followed Martha toward the welcoming light of the cabin. As she stepped onto the porch, she caught the scent of coffee and wood smoke, heard the comfortable pop and crackle of the fireplace within. It struck her then that this might be more than just a temporary refuge. This could become a real home, if she chose to let it. Behind her, she heard Sandro leading the horse and mule toward the barn, his boots crunching softly on the packed earth. His quiet humming drifted through the night air, a melody she didn't recognize but found strangely comforting. Martha held the door open, waiting patiently. "Come in, child," she said softly. "You're safe here. Come in and rest." Martha helped Claudine settle into the cabin while Sandro tended to the animals. The interior surprised her. It was nothing like the rough bachelor's quarters she had imagined. Clean, swept plank floors stretched beneath her feet, and carefully placed lanterns cast warm light across the spacious room. Most striking were the floor-to-ceiling shelves lining one wall, filled with leather-bound books of various sizes. "He's quite the reader," Martha commented, noting Claudine's wide-eyed gaze. "Keeps his mind sharp during the long winter months." Near the stone hearth, which Martha had kept burning bright, sat a well-worn Bible on a small table. Its pages showed signs of frequent use, with various dried flowers and leaves marking different passages. Above, bundles of dried herbs hung from the rough-hewn beams, sage, yarrow, and others Claudine couldn't name, filling the air with a subtle, pleasant fragrance. "The bedroom's through here," Martha said, leading her to a door off the main room. "Sandro insisted I air it out and put fresh linens on the bed when I saw him heading to town this morning." "He knew?" Claudine asked, startled. "He planned to bring someone back?" Martha's eyes crinkled with amusement. "No, but he always likes things ready for guests, even if they're rare up here." She patted Claudine's arm. "Get some rest. I'll see you both soon." After Martha left, Claudine stood awkwardly in the main room, unsure where to settle. She couldn't take his bed. It wouldn't be proper. She was searching for a suitable spot on the floor when Sandro came in, bringing a blast of cold air with him. "Bedroom's ready for you," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "Oh, I couldn't possibly," Claudine began. "You'll take the bed," Sandro said firmly but gently. "I've got my cot out here by the fire. Been sleeping on it most nights anyway." He moved to a trunk against the wall and pulled out extra blankets. The cot was already set up near the hearth, its frame sturdy and well-maintained like everything else in the cabin. Claudine watched as he arranged the blankets with careful precision. "There's a wash basin in the bedroom," he told her. "Water's fresh from the spring. Anything else you need, just ask." Claudine stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. In all her 60 years, she'd grown accustomed to being an inconvenience, a burden to be tolerated at best. This simple kindness, offered without condition or complaint, touched something deep within her. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice thick with emotion. Sandro simply nodded, then turned to bank the fire for the night. In the bedroom, Claudine found everything arranged with the same careful attention. A clean nightgown, likely borrowed from Martha, lay folded on the bed. The wash basin held clear spring water, with a fresh cake of soap and a soft cloth beside it. Even the quilt on the bed had been turned down invitingly. Once she was alone, the tears she'd been holding back all evening began to fall. She muffled her sobs in the quilt, not wanting Sandro to hear. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, though. For the first time in years, she felt safe, protected, respected. The bed was soft, the blankets warm and clean-smelling. Despite her tumultuous emotions, exhaustion soon pulled her into deep sleep. She woke to the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the window, and the air held the sharp chill of early morning. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented, until memories of the previous night flooded back. The chopping continued steady and strong outside. Claudine rose quietly, dressed in yesterday's clothes, and crept to the window. Through the frost-edged glass, she could see Sandro at work in the yard. His powerful frame moved with practiced efficiency as he split log after log, adding to the already impressive woodpile against the cabin wall. Uncertainty gripped her as she stood in the bedroom doorway. What was expected of her now? How should she act? Years of ridicule and dismissal had taught her to make herself small, to avoid drawing attention. But something about this place, about Sandro's quiet dignity, made her want to be useful. The kitchen area was well organized, with a cast-iron stove and neat rows of provisions on shelves. She found coffee beans in a sealed jar and ground them carefully, the rich aroma filling the cabin. In another container, she discovered flour and yeast. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions of mixing fry bread dough, a skill learned from her grandmother long ago. As she worked, the sound of chopping ceased. Heavy boots scraped on the porch, and then Sandro entered, bringing a rush of cold air and the sharp scent of fresh-cut wood. His face was smudged with soot from the woodpile, and his breath came in visible puffs in the cool air. When he saw her at the stove, a faint smile touched his weathered features. "Smells good," he said, hanging up his coat. "You didn't have to cook." "I wanted to," Claudine replied softly, surprising herself with the truth of it. "It's the least I can do after." She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything: his rescue, his kindness, this safe haven he'd provided. Sandro's smile deepened slightly. "Much obliged, then." He washed his hands and face at the pump by the sink, then settled at the rough-hewn table while Claudine finished cooking. The fry bread turned out golden brown and the coffee was strong and hot. They ate in comfortable silence as dawn painted the sky outside in pale pink and gold. Claudine found herself relaxing gradually. the tight knot of anxiety in her chest loosening with each passing moment. When Sandro finished eating, he sat back in his chair with his coffee cup. "Best breakfast I've had in a long while," he said warmly. "You've got a gift for cooking." The simple praise brought heat to Claudine's cheeks. She'd cooked for her cousins for years, but they'd only ever criticized or ignored her efforts. This straightforward appreciation made her feel truly valued for the first time in recent memory. "I can cook other things too," she offered hesitantly. "And clean, and mend clothes. I'm good with a needle." Sandro nodded. "We'll work out fair payment for whatever you choose to do. But there's no rush to decide anything. Take time to settle in first." As she cleared the breakfast dishes, Claudine felt something unfamiliar stirring in her heart. Here, in this unexpected place with this quiet, courteous man, she wasn't being judged for her size or her spinsterhood. Her skills were appreciated, her presence welcomed. For the first time in years, she felt something like pride in being useful, in contributing to a household that valued her contributions. The morning sun streamed through the windows now, highlighting the dried herbs hanging from the beams and making the brass fittings on the bookshelves gleam. Sandro had moved to the porch, where she could hear him working on some task. Inside, Claudine began to explore the kitchen more thoroughly, mentally cataloging supplies and planning future meals. For the first time since leaving town, she felt truly certain she had made the right choice in coming here. That afternoon, the sun hung high and warm in the Colorado sky. Sandro gestured for Claudine to join him outside. "Thought you might want to see the place," he said, his voice gentle as always. "Since you'll be staying here a spell?" Claudine nodded, following him down the well-worn path from the cabin's front door. Her legs still ached from the long ride yesterday, but curiosity pushed her forward. The homestead spread out before them, neat and orderly despite its remote location. Their first stop was a sturdy chicken coop. A dozen hens pecked and scratched in the enclosed yard, clucking contentedly. "They're good layers," Sandro explained, reaching into his pocket for a handful of corn. "Most days, we get 8 or 9 eggs." He scattered the feed, and the chickens rushed forward, their feathers gleaming russet and gold in the sunlight. "They seem well cared for," Claudine observed, watching as one plump hen settled into a dust bath. "Martha helps when I'm away hunting," Sandro said. "You met her this morning. She lives about 2 miles downstream with her husband." Beyond the chicken yard lay a small field of corn, the young plants standing straight and green in neat rows. "It ain't much," Sandro admitted, "but it sees me through winter. There's good soil here if you've a mind for gardening." Claudine's fingers itched to pull the weeds she spotted between the cornstalks. "I could help with that," she offered. "I've done plenty of gardening." Sandro's scarred face creased in a slight smile. "Be grateful for the help, if you're willing." He led her past the corn to a solid structure built into the side of a small hill. "This here's the smokehouse. Keep meat and fish through winter this way." Inside, the smokehouse was cool and dark, with hooks hanging from the ceiling and shelves along the walls. The rich scent of hickory smoke lingered in the air. Everything was clean and organized, like the cabin. Claudine was struck again by how different this place was from what she'd expected of a mountain man's home. They walked back toward the cabin in comfortable silence. Near the door, Sandro paused. "Miss Wells," he said formally, "I want you to know something clear. You ain't bound here by that foolishness in town. If you want to leave any time, just say the word. I'll see you safe wherever you want to go." Claudine's throat tightened at his words. She stared down at her worn shoes, fighting back tears. "Truth is," she whispered, "I haven't got anywhere else. My cousins made that clear enough." Sandro's hand twitched as if he might reach out to comfort her, but he kept his distance. "Well then," he said quietly, "you're welcome to stay as long as you like." Inside, Claudine busied herself preparing supper from the supplies she'd found in the pantry. The familiar work helped settle her emotions. She made a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and dried apple pie. The kitchen filled with warm, homey smells. As they finished eating, Sandro rose and went to a shelf near the fireplace. Claudine expected him to reach for the Bible she'd noticed earlier. Instead, he pulled down a worn hymn book, its leather cover soft with age. "Do you sing, Miss Wells?" he asked, settling back in his chair. A little, she admitted, in church sometimes. Sandro opened the book carefully. His rough fingers found a page, and to Claudine's amazement, he began to sing. His voice was deep and untrained, but true. The familiar hymn filled the cabin with its message of grace and redemption. After a moment's hesitation, Claudine joined in. Her voice quavered at first, unused to being heard. But Sandro's steady baritone supported her, and gradually she gained confidence. Together, their voices blended in the ancient words of praise and comfort. They sang several hymns as twilight deepened outside the cabin windows. When they finished, Sandro closed the book gently. "Been a long time since I had someone to sing with," he said. Claudine smiled shyly. "It was nice," she agreed, "and thank you." Later, as full darkness settled, Sandro moved to tend the fire. He rolled up his sleeves to arrange the logs, and Claudine gasped softly. In the flickering light, she could see his arms were marked with scars. Some looked like burns, others like deep cuts long healed. Sandro heard her sharp intake of breath. He straightened slowly, looking into the flames rather than at her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally he spoke, his voice low and rough with memory. "Reckon you ought to know the truth about me, Miss Wells. These marks, they're part of a story folks in town tell different ways." Claudine sat very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What is the truth?" she asked quietly. "Truth is, I had a wife once. Sarah. She was Apache, beautiful as sunrise over the mountains." His voice softened with remembered love. "We had a son too. Little fellow, just learning to walk." He paused, adding another log to the fire. Sparks flew up the chimney like golden stars. "Railroad wanted this land. Sent men to drive us off. When I wouldn't sell, they came one day while I was hunting." His hands clenched on the poker. "Killed them both. Burned our first cabin with them inside." Claudine's heart pounded. The story was horrible, but was it truth or clever fiction? She'd heard whispers in town about Sandro Bearclaw Boone, tales of violence and murder. "The railroad men spread word that I'd done it myself," Sandro continued. "Said I'd killed my own family in a drunken rage. Called me murderer, wild man. Tried to hunt me down." He touched one of the scars on his arm. "Left their marks when they caught me. But I got away." He turned to face Claudine at last. In the firelight, his scars stood out starkly on his weathered face. "That's the truth of it, Miss Wells. I don't blame you if you want to leave knowing this, but I swear on my Sarah's grave, I never harmed her or our boy, never would." Claudine sat frozen, her mind whirling. The pain in his voice seemed genuine, but the story was awful. If true, he was a wronged man deserving sympathy. If false, he was dangerous, and she was alone with him, miles from town. The fire crackled in the silence. Outside, a coyote called mournfully in the distance. The night pressed close around the cabin, full of shadows and uncertainty. Claudine began, then fell silent, unsure what to say or believe. Sandro moved away from the fire, giving her space. "No need to decide anything tonight," he said quietly. "Just thought you should know the whole truth, not just town gossip." He took his coat from its peg by the door. "Think I'll check on the horses before turning in. Take your time settling for the night." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Claudine alone with her churning thoughts. The comfortable feeling she'd built through the day wavered under the weight of his revelation. She stared into the fire, trying to read truth in its dancing flames. The hymnal still lay on the table where they'd left it. She touched its worn cover, remembering how their voices had joined in songs of faith and redemption. Had that been real? Was anything here what it seemed? Through the window, she could see Sandro's broad figure moving toward the barn, his shadow stretching long in the moonlight. The night grew heavier with questions she couldn't answer, fears she couldn't dismiss. Sleep, when it finally came, would be long in arriving. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Claudine woke early, her mind still troubled by Sandro's revelations from the night before. Through the cabin's small window, she watched the sun paint the mountainside in shades of gold and pink. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with her inner turmoil. She was already dressed and preparing breakfast when Sandro came in from his morning chores. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the warm kitchen. He hung his hat on its peg, watching her work for a moment before speaking. "Miss Wells," he said carefully, "I've been thinking, today being Sunday and all, maybe you'd like to attend service in town. Might do you good to see some familiar faces." Claudine's hands stilled over the stove. The thought of facing the townspeople made her stomach clench, yet part of her yearned for the familiar comfort of church, the weekly ritual that had structured her life for so long. I'm not sure that's wise," she said softly, turning the bacon with trembling fingers. Sandro pulled out a chair and sat at the table. "Ain't nothing to fear," he said. "You got as much right to worship as anybody. More than some, I reckon." Claudine placed a plate before him, considering his words. The thought of those staring eyes, those whispering voices. But wouldn't staying away only confirm their worst suspicions? "Perhaps you're right," she said finally, "though I expect there'll be talk." "Let 'em talk," Sandro replied, his voice gentle but firm. "You ain't done nothing wrong." They finished breakfast in companionable silence. Afterward, Claudine changed into her best dress, the one she'd been wearing that fateful night in the saloon. It was wrinkled from being stuffed in her small bag, but she smoothed it as best she could. Sandro hitched up his wagon while she pinned her hair neat and tidy. The morning air was cool as they set out, the wagon's wooden wheels rattling over the rutted trail. Claudine sat stiffly on the bench seat, her hands folded in her lap. Beside her, Sandro handled the reins with quiet confidence. The ride was mostly silent, broken only by the creak of leather harness and the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves. Claudine watched the landscape change as they descended from the mountains toward town. With each mile, her anxiety grew. The little white church came into view all too soon. Several wagons were already parked outside, and people in their Sunday best milled about the steps. As Sandro drew their wagon to a halt, the conversation stopped. All eyes turned toward them. Claudine felt her cheeks burning as Sandro helped her down from the wagon. She clutched her worn Bible to her chest like a shield. The whispers started immediately, carried on the morning breeze. Living in sin with Bearclaw. Shameless woman. Never thought she'd fall so low. Sandro's hand touched her elbow lightly, steadying her as they walked toward the church steps. The crowd parted before them, no one quite meeting their eyes. Claudine lifted her chin, trying to summon dignity she didn't feel. Inside, they found seats near the back. The familiar smell of beeswax and aging hymn books surrounded them. Claudine had always loved this small sanctuary, but today it felt different. Hostile. Several people moved to different pews when they sat denied. Before the service began, Claudine made her way to the communal table at the back of the church. She'd brought fresh baked bread, as she had every Sunday for years. Her hands shook slightly as she set it among the other offerings. No one approached while she was there. Pastor Samuel Reeves entered, his formal black coat perfectly pressed. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Claudine and Sandro, but he made no immediate comment. The service began with a hymn, Amazing Grace, one they'd sung together just last night. Claudine's voice faltered on the familiar words. Throughout the sermon, she felt the weight of stairs on her back. When Pastor Reeves spoke of moral corruption and the dangers of straying from God's path, his eyes seemed to linger in their direction. Claudine's face burned hotter. After the final hymn, as people began to file out, Pastor Reeves approached their pew. His expression was stern beneath his genteel manner. "Miss Wells," he said softly, "might I have a word?" Sandro started to rise, but Claudine touched his arm. "It's all right," she murmured. She followed the pastor to a quiet corner near the altar. "My dear," Pastor Reeves began, his voice heavy with disapproval, "I must warn you of the grave danger to your soul. Living unchaperoned with a man, and such a man, brings disgrace upon yourself and this congregation." Claudine's hands twisted together. "Pastor, it's not what you think. Mr. Boone has been nothing but respectful. Appearances matter, Miss Wells. Your reputation already," he paused delicately, "somewhat compromised, cannot sustain such scandal. I urge you to reconsider this arrangement before it's too late." Tears pricked at Claudine's eyes, but she blinked them back. Through the window, she could see women gathering near the communal table, pointedly avoiding her bread. "Thank you for your concern, Pastor," she managed to say. Her voice quavered but held steady. "I'll pray on it." She turned away before he could say more, making her way back to where Sandro waited. His face was impassive, but his eyes held understanding. Outside, the whispers grew louder. Someone had knocked her bread to the ground. Crumbs scattered in the dust. Sandro's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he helped her into the wagon. They were well outside town before he spoke. "You don't owe them nothing, Miss Wells. Not their approval, not their understanding." Claudine stared at her hands still clasped tightly in her lap. The shame of those whispers, those stares burned in her chest. Yet alongside it was something else, a flutter of pride in how Sandro had stood beside her, calm and dignified despite their scorn. "I know," she said softly, "but it hurts all the same." The wagon rattled onward, climbing back into the mountains. The morning's bright promise had faded to a heavy, overcast sky that matched Claudine's mood. Yet as they gained elevation, leaving the town behind, she felt something else growing beneath the hurt. A tentative sense of belonging not to the place she'd left, but to this strange new life she'd found. Sandro's quiet presence beside her was steadfast, asking nothing, offering only shelter from the storm of wagging tongues. The rest of the ride passed in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the tense quiet of their journey to town, but something more like peace. The familiar sight of Sandro's cabin brought unexpected relief. As he helped her down from the wagon, Claudine realized that somehow, in just these few days, this place had become more of a home than the town had been in years. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming with me today." Sandro nodded, his scarred face gentle. "Ain't nothing to thank me for. Sometimes standing tall is all a body can do." They walked together toward the cabin, leaving the wagon and the weight of the town's judgment behind them. The mountain air was clean and fresh, carrying the promise of rain. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang, its clear notes cutting through the somber afternoon. That evening, after their trying day in town, Claudine stirred a pot of beans over the fire while Sandro cleaned his hunting rifle at the table. The cabin felt peaceful after the morning's turmoil, though shadows of judgment still lingered in her mind. A sharp rap at the door startled them both. Sandro's hand moved to his rifle, but it was only a branch scratching in the wind. Still, something felt different about the evening. The air held an expectant quality, like the moments before a storm breaks. "Might want to check the creek before dark," Sandro said, his voice thoughtful. "Rain's coming. Best make sure nothing's blocking the flow." Claudine nodded, grateful for the chance to stretch her legs. The beans would simmer a while yet. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the cooling air. "I'll come with you," Sandro said, setting aside his rifle. "Been meaning to check my traps anyway." They walked together through the deepening dusk, their boots crunching on pine needles. The creek gurgled softly ahead, its voice a constant companion to cabin life. As they approached the bank, Sandro suddenly stopped, holding up one hand in warning. "Look there," he whispered, pointing to the muddy edge of the creek. Claudine squinted in the failing light. Small footprints marked the soft earth, a child's bare feet, the tracks fresh and clear. "Apache," Sandro said softly, kneeling to examine the prints. "Young one, maybe 8 years old, running scared by the look of it." Claudine's heart squeezed. Out here alone? But how? "Soldiers been pushing tribes hard lately." Sandro's voice was grim. "Sometimes families get separated. Sometimes worse." He stood, scanning the brush with experienced eyes. "Tracks lead that way." He pointed upstream. "Child's probably hiding, watching us right now." As if confirming his words, a tiny rustle came from a dense thicket of serviceberry bushes. Claudine caught a flash of movement, dark eyes quickly hidden. Sandro stepped forward slowly, speaking in soft Apache words. His voice was gentle, like he used when approaching a spooked horse. There was no response, but the bushes trembled slightly. "What are you saying to him?" Claudine whispered. "I'm telling him he's safe, that we won't hurt him." Sandro spoke a few more phrases in Apache, then added in English, promising him food. At the word food, another rustle came from the bushes. Claudine remembered the chunk of bread in her apron pocket, saved from supper. She drew it out slowly. "May I?" she asked Sandro. At his nod, she stepped forward, holding the bread where it could be seen. "You must be so hungry, little one," she said softly. "Please come out. We want to help." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then slowly, branches parted. A small figure emerged, so thin it hurt Claudine's heart to see. The boy's clothes were ragged, his feet scratched and dirty. His dark eyes darted between them, ready to flee at any sudden movement. Claudine held perfectly still, the bread extended. The boy inched closer, hunger warring with fear on his face. When he was within arm's reach, he snatched the bread and retreated a few steps, watching them warily as he devoured it. "Poor child," Claudine murmured. "He's half-starved." Sandro spoke again in Apache, gesturing toward the cabin. The boy followed his pointing hand, then looked back at them uncertainly. "I told him we have more food," Sandro translated, "and a warm fire." "Please come," Claudine added, though she knew the boy probably couldn't understand her words. She tried to put all her concern, all her maternal feelings into her voice and expression. Perhaps something got through because the boy took a hesitant step toward them. Then another. Sandro kept up a gentle stream of Apache words as they slowly made their way back to the cabin, the boy following like a wild creature ready to bolt at any moment. Inside, Claudine ladled up a bowl of beans while Sandro built up the fire. The boy hovered near the door until the food smell proved too tempting. He crouched by the hearth, eating desperately, as if afraid the bowl might be taken away. "Slow down, little one," Claudine said softly. "There's plenty more." Sandro translated, and the boy's eating pace eased slightly. When the bowl was empty, Claudine filled it again. As the boy ate, Sandro spoke with him quietly in Apache. "His name is Tenok," Sandro said after a while. "His family." He paused, his face darkening. "Soldiers came to their camp 2 weeks ago. He ran, like his mother told him to. Been hiding in the hills since then." Claudine's eyes filled with tears. "Like 2 weeks? All alone?" The boy, Tenok, looked up at her voice, then quickly down again. But he seemed less tense now, the warm food and fire working their magic. "He needs clothes," Claudine said, noticing how his thin shirt hung in tatters. "I have some spare fabric. I could sew." She stopped, realizing she was getting ahead of herself. They hadn't even discussed if the boy would stay. But looking at Sandro's face, she saw her own thoughts reflected there. "Ask him," she said softly. "Ask if he'll stay with us." Sandro spoke to Tenok, who listened intently, his dark eyes moving between them. When Sandro finished, the boy was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded, just once. That night, Claudine made up a bed for Tenok near the fire using her softest quilt. The boy curled up like a small animal, watching them until his eyes grew heavy and closed. Dawn found Claudine already at work, measuring and cutting fabric from her meager store. She had enough for 2 shirts and a pair of pants, she thought. Simple clothes, but sturdy. As she sewed, she watched Sandro teaching Tenok how to check and set rabbit snares near the cabin. The boy proved a quick study. By mid-morning, he had set 3 snares under Sandro's guidance. His movements were still cautious, but he seemed more at ease, especially with Sandro. Perhaps the familiar language helped, or maybe he sensed the mountain man's own connection to his people. Over the next few days, a routine began to form. Claudine sewed while keeping an eye on the cooking and cleaning. Sandro taught Tenok hunting skills, speaking to him in a mixture of Apache and English. The boy began to lose his frightened look, though he remained quiet, speaking rarely even in his own language. One evening, as Claudine mended one of Sandro's shirts by lamplight, she heard something that made her pause. Laughter. Looking out the cabin's small window, she saw Sandro showing Tenok how to clean a rabbit they'd snared together. The boy was actually smiling, his face transformed by joy as Sandro praised his work in Apache. The sight filled Claudine's heart near to bursting. She had never thought to feel this way, this fierce, protective love for a child. She had always assumed such feelings weren't meant for her, that she would die a lonely spinster. Yet here she was, watching this brave, wounded boy and feeling more maternal than she ever had in her life. And Sandro, the change in him was remarkable. The gruff mountain man seemed to soften when teaching Tenok, his scarred face gentling with remembered tenderness. Sometimes she caught him watching the boy with an expression of such mingled grief and hope, it brought tears to her eyes. They were an odd family, perhaps, a scorned spinster, a feared mountain man, and an orphaned Apache boy. But somehow they fit together, their broken pieces matching in ways that made them stronger together than apart. That night, as they sat around the fire after supper, Tenoch did something new. He spoke, haltingly, but clearly, in careful English. "Thank you." Claudine's eyes filled with tears. Sandro's hand found hers in the firelight, squeezing gently. Outside, rain began to fall, but inside the cabin, warmth bloomed like spring flowers after winter's long night. The boy fell asleep by the fire, wrapped in the quilt Claudine had given him. She tucked it more securely around his shoulders, her touch gentle as a mother's blessing. When she straightened, she found Sandro watching her, his eyes soft in the firelight. "You're good with him," he said quietly. "As are you." She replied, "I see how he watches you, learning everything you show him." Sandro nodded, his gaze turning to the sleeping child. "Reminds me of my boy sometimes. Way he moves, way he laughs." His voice roughened. "Never thought I'd hear children's laughter in this cabin again." Claudine's heart ached for him for the loss that still haunted his eyes. But there was something else there too now, a cautious hope, like spring buds pushing through melting snow. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching Tenoch sleep. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, the rain fell steady and gentle, blessing the earth with renewal. Inside, 3 lost souls had found each other, creating something precious and new. A family built not of blood, but of choice, and love, and healing. The morning dawned crisp and clear as Claudine helped Tenoch into his new shirt. Her stitching wasn't perfect, but the boy traced the careful seams with wonder. He'd never had clothes made just for him before. "There now," she said, smoothing the fabric across his shoulders. "Much better than those old rags." Sandro watched from the doorway, already dressed in his Sunday best, which meant his least patched shirt and the attempted combing of his wild beard. "Ready?" he asked softly. Claudine nodded, though her stomach churned. Last Sunday's rejection still stung, but surely the town would soften once they met Tenoch. The boy had such gentle ways about him. Surely they would see past their prejudices. The wagon creaked as they climbed aboard, Tenoch wedged securely between them. The boy's eyes were wide, taking in everything as they rattled down the mountain trail. He'd never been to town before, and Claudine could feel his mixture of excitement and nervousness in how tightly he gripped her skirts. As they approached the church, the bell was already tolling, calling the faithful to worship. Claudine saw heads turn as Sandro helped her down from the wagon, then lifted Tenoch. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. "Lord have mercy," someone muttered. "She's brought one of them to church." Claudine lifted her chin, gripping Tenoch's hand tightly. The boy pressed against her skirts, sensing the hostility. Sandro's presence behind them was solid, protective. They mounted the church steps and the crowd parted like water around stones. Inside, the usual friendly chatter died. Pews emptied as they approached, people shifting away as if darkness itself had entered God's house. "Half savage," a woman's voice hissed clearly in the silence. "Mrs. Peterson, one of Claudine's own cousins." The words struck like physical blows, making Tenoch flinch. Pastor Reeves stood at the pulpit, his face a mask of disapproval. As they approached, he held up one hand. "I cannot," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed church. "I cannot bless this." His gesture encompassed all 3 of them, but his eyes fixed on Tenoch with particular distaste. "He's just a child," Claudine protested, her voice shaking. "Innocent in God's eyes." "There is nothing innocent about bringing a heathen into God's house," the pastor cut her off. "Miss Wells, you have strayed far from the path of righteousness. First, living unmarried with that man. Now this. I urge you to repent before it's too late." Claudine felt tears burning in her eyes, but anger burned hotter. "Where in Scripture," she demanded, her voice stronger now, "does it say to turn away children? To judge them by the color of their skin or the language of their prayers?" A shocked murmur ran through the congregation. Women never questioned the pastor so boldly. But Claudine wasn't finished. This boy has lost everything. His family, his home. He needs God's love more than any of us. If you turn him away, what does that say about your own hearts?" "That's enough," Pastor Reeves thundered. "Remove yourselves from this sanctuary immediately." Sandro's hand settled on Claudine's shoulder. "Come on," he said quietly. "They ain't worth your words." Outside, the morning sunshine seemed mockingly bright. Tenoch's hand trembled in Claudine's, and she squeezed it gently. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Still need that cloth from the mercantile?" Sandro asked after a moment. Claudine squared her shoulders. "Yes, the boy needs proper trousers, and your shirts need mending." The mercantile's bell jingled as they entered. Mr. Johnson, the owner, watched them warily from behind his counter. Other customers quickly finished their business and left. Claudine selected several yards of sturdy cotton, some thread and buttons. She also chose a piece of bright red fabric, thinking how Tenoch's eyes had lit up at the color. When Sandro pulled out his pouch of gold dust to pay, Mr. Johnson's suspicious look deepened. He weighed the dust carefully, as if expecting to be cheated. "Where'd you come by this gold, Bear Claw?" he asked, his tone implying theft. "Same place as always," Sandro replied evenly. "My claim up Lightning Creek. Been working it 15 years now." Mr. Johnson grunted but took the payment. As he wrapped their purchases, the bell jingled again. 2 men entered, strangers in city clothes. Their eyes fixed on Sandro with predatory interest. Sandro gathered their packages quickly, ushering Claudine and Tenoch out. His usual unhurried movements were tense now, alert. They didn't speak until they were well out of town, the wagon climbing steadily toward home. Finally, Sandro broke the silence. "Those men in the store," he said heavily. "Railroad men. They've been watching me these past weeks, trying to pressure me off my claim. It's where they want to run their new line." Claudine clutched Tenoch closer. "What can they do?" "Nothing legal," Sandro said, "but they don't much care about legal. They're the ones spread those lies about me killing my family." His voice roughened. "And now they might try using you, both of you, to hurt me." "How?" Claudine asked, though she feared she knew. "Could claim I kidnapped you, that I stole the boy. Town's already half convinced I'm a murderer. Wouldn't take much to turn them against me completely." He looked at her, his eyes troubled. "Maybe you'd be safer back in town." "No." Claudine's voice was firm. "I won't leave you to face them alone. And I won't abandon Tenoch to their mercy." She straightened her spine, years of bearing mockery and scorn lending her strength. "Let them try their worst. We're family now, all 3 of us. Family stands together." Sandro's weathered face softened. Tenoch, though he couldn't understand all their words, pressed closer to Claudine's side. She wrapped her arm around him, feeling the fierce protective love that had grown in her heart. The wagon rattled homeward through golden afternoon light. Behind them lay rejection and danger, but ahead was their cabin, small, simple, but filled with something Claudine had searched for all her life. Belonging, love, family. Let the town whisper. Let the railroad men scheme. She had found her place at last, and she would defend it with everything she had. As they crested the last rise before home, Tenoch pointed excitedly at a hawk soaring overhead. Sandro named it in Apache, then English, teaching as he always did. Claudine smiled, already planning the new clothes she would make from their purchases. They were outcasts, all 3 of them, but together they had built something precious, something worth fighting for. The town's rejection had only cemented what Claudine already knew in her heart. This was where she belonged, with her unlikely family in this cabin on the mountain far from the cruel whispers below. She reached out, taking Sandro's rough hand in hers. He squeezed gently, his touch conveying what words could not. Whatever came, they would face it together. The cabin came into view, smoke rising peacefully from its chimney. Home. Not the home Claudine had ever imagined for herself, but the one God had led her to, unexpected and perfect in its own way. As they pulled up to the door, Tenoch jumped down eagerly, already chattering in his mixture of Apache and English about helping with the horses. Watching him, Claudine felt her heart swell with love and certainty. The town's rejection didn't matter. Here was where she belonged, with this gentle giant of a man and this precious child. Here was her family, chosen and true. The afternoon sun slanted through the cabin's windows as Claudine settled at the rough-hewn table, her old primer open before her. The book's pages were worn soft at the corners from years of use, its spine cracked and mended with care. Tenoch perched beside her on a wooden stool, his dark eyes wide with curiosity. "This here's the letter A," Claudine said, pointing to the faded illustration of an apple. "Can you make that sound?" Apple. Tenoch's small finger traced the letter carefully. "Ah," he echoed, then smiled when Claudine nodded encouragement. From his place by the hearth, Sandro looked up from cleaning his rifle. He set the weapon aside and moved closer, drawn by their quiet lesson. His heavy boots scraped across the plank floor as he pulled up another stool. "Mind if I listen in?" he asked, his deep voice gentle. Claudine felt warmth spread through her chest at his interest. "Of course not. We're just starting with our letters." She turned the page, revealing a picture of a bear. "Ba makes the boo sound, like bear." "Like bear claw," Tenoch said suddenly, pointing at Sandro with a grin. Laughter burst from Claudine before she could stop it. Not the careful, contained chuckle she'd trained herself to use in town, but a full, rich sound that filled the cabin. Sandro's own laugh rumbled in harmony, and Tenoch's high, clear giggles joined in. "That's right clever of you," Sandro said, ruffling the boy's dark hair. "Reckon you'll be reading faster than me before long." Claudine blinked in surprise. "Can you not read well?" A flush crept up Sandro's neck, visible even through his beard. "Know my letters well enough to sign my name and read basic trail signs. Never had much schooling proper-like." "Would you like to learn alongside Tenoch?" Claudine offered carefully, not wanting to wound his pride. Sandro was quiet for a moment, his scarred hands clasped before him. "Reckon I would if you're willing to teach an old bear new tricks." Claudine shifted her stool to make room for him at the table. "It's never too late to learn. Here, let's try this verse together." She guided them through simple words: cat, dog, sun, moon. Tenoch caught on quickly, his young mind eager for knowledge. Sandro struggled more, his big fingers clumsy on the page, but his determination never wavered. When he successfully sounded out mountain all by himself, his face lit up with such boyish pride that Claudine had to look away, her heart squeezing with unexpected tenderness. The lesson continued until the sun dipped low enough to require a lamp. Claudine rose to start supper, her joints creaking from sitting so long. As she moved about the kitchen, pulling out cornmeal and dried beans, she heard Sandro and Tenoch still working together, the boy helping the man sound out words. Their quiet voices, one high and clear, one deep and rough, created a peaceful melody that made her pause, drinking in the moment. The cabin filled with savory smells as she cooked, cornbread browning in the Dutch oven, beans simmering with salt pork, dried apples stewing with cinnamon. Tenoch helped her set the table, carefully carrying the tin plates as if they were fine china. Sandro brought in fresh water from the spring, the bucket's contents catching the last rays of sunset through the window. They ate together, passing food family style, their movements already falling into comfortable patterns. When Tenoch asked for seconds of cornbread, Claudine felt satisfaction warm her chest. The boy had been so thin when they found him. Each healthy appetite was a victory. After the dishes were cleared and washed, Sandro disappeared briefly into the bedroom. He returned holding something long and slender wrapped in soft leather. Claudine watched curiously as he unwrapped it, revealing a wooden flute, smooth with age and handling. "My late wife, Morningstar, she taught me to play," he said quietly, his fingers caressing the instrument. "Been a long spell since I took it out, but—" He glanced at Tenoch, then Claudine. "Reckon tonight feels right." He settled into his chair by the hearth, the firelight catching the silver in his hair. For a moment, he just held the flute, as if remembering, then lifted it to his lips. The first notes were hesitant, like a stream testing spring thaw, but soon gained confidence. The melody that emerged was unlike anything Claudine had ever heard. It started low and mournful, like wind through canyon walls, then lifted into something that made her think of soaring hawks and summer rain. There was loneliness in it, yes, but also hope, like stars appearing one by one in a darkening sky. Tenoch had curled up on the bearskin rug before the fire, his head pillowed on his arm. His eyes grew heavy as the music played, but he fought sleep, not wanting to miss a note. Claudine sat in her rocking chair, hands idle in her lap, watching the firelight play across Sandro's face as he played. The tune changed, becoming softer, gentler, a lullaby, she realized. Tenoch's eyes finally closed, his breathing evening out into sleep. Still Sandro played, the notes weaving with the pop and crackle of the fire, the distant call of a night bird, the whisper of wind in the pines outside. Claudine's heart felt too full for her chest. Here in this simple cabin with these two unlikely companions, she had found something she'd never known she was missing. Not just shelter or safety, but belonging, purpose, love. She bowed her head, lips moving in silent prayer. Thank you, Lord, for leading me here. Thank you for this strange, precious gift of family. The music faded to a whisper, then silence. Sandro lowered the flute, his eyes distant with memory. Outside, an owl called, "Hoo, hoo," and was answered by its mate. Peace settled over the cabin like a warm blanket, wrapping them in its embrace. Tenoch stirred slightly in his sleep, murmuring something in Apache. Without discussion, Sandro rose and gently lifted the boy, carrying him to the small cot they'd set up in the corner. Claudine followed with a quilt, tucking it around his thin shoulders. They stood together for a moment, watching him sleep. This child who had somehow become theirs. He's starting to trust us, Claudine whispered. Sandro nodded, healing bit by bit like we all are. Their eyes met in the dimness and something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, the recognition of wounds slowly mending. Claudine felt the urge to reach for his hand, but held back, still unsure of such gestures. Instead, she moved to bank the fire for the night while Sandro carefully rewrapped his flute. The familiar tasks felt different somehow, weighted with contentment rather than obligation. This was home now, truly home, with all its unexpected joys and quiet moments of grace. The owl called again, closer this time. Through the window, Claudine could see stars scattered across the velvet sky, more than she'd ever been able to spot from town. Each one seemed to shine with promise, with possibility, with hope for tomorrow. For now, though, there was just this moment, the sleeping child, the warmth of the fire, the lingering echo of Sandro's music in the air. Simple gifts, perhaps, but precious beyond measure to a woman who had never dared dream of such blessings. Dawn had barely touched the eastern mountains when hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Claudine looked up from where she was feeding the chickens, her heart stuttering at the sound. 5 riders approached the cabin, their forms dark against the pale morning sky. Even from a distance, their bearing spoke of authority and threat. Sandro emerged from the smokehouse, wiping his hands on his leather apron. His expression remained calm, but Claudine saw his shoulders tense. "Get Tenoch inside," he said quietly. Claudine hurried to where the boy was gathering eggs. "Come along now," she whispered, guiding him toward the cabin. He went without protest, sensing the urgency in her touch. The riders drew closer, dust rising beneath their horses' hooves. Their clothes were city-cut, their boots polished, railroad men, not local law. The leader wore a black bowler hat and carried a leather document case. His clean-shaven face held no warmth as he reined his horse to a stop. "Sandro Boone," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard, "also known as Bear Claw." Sandro stepped forward, positioning himself between the men in the cabin. "That's my name." The man in the bowler hat dismounted, pulling papers from his case. "I am Agent Morris of the Western Pacific Railroad Company. We have business to discuss." "State your piece," and Sandro said evenly. Morris unfolded a document with deliberate slowness. "We have here a writ for your arrest. Charges of murder. 3 railroad surveyors found dead near Medicine Bow 2 years past." Claudine gasped from the cabin doorway. She had left Tenoch inside and come back out, unable to stay hidden. "That's a lie," Sandro said, his voice still steady. "I never killed those men." Morris's lip curled. We have witnesses who place you in the area. The surveyors were mapping a route through your claimed territory. Their bodies showed signs of expert tracking and ambush, skills you're known to possess. I was hunting elk that season, 2 valleys over. The Apache people can verify my whereabouts. The word of savages carries no weight in territorial court, Morris sneered. Surrender peacefully now, and perhaps the judge will show mercy. Claudine could contain herself no longer. She hurried forward, her skirts rustling. You cannot take him. I know this man. He is gentle, honorable. He would never murder anyone. The agents exchanged amused glances. Morris looked her up and down with obvious distaste. And who might you be? Claudine Wells, I live here, I dash. Ah, yes, Morris interrupted. The spinster he bought for 2 bits. Fat old women make poor witnesses, madam. Your relationship with the accused rather taints your testimony. Heat flooded Claudine's face. The casual cruelty of his words struck deeper than she wanted to admit. But she held her ground, chin lifted. You'll not take him today, Sandro said quietly. Your writ needs the territorial marshal's seal. That paper's worthless without it. Morris's face darkened. We'll return with proper documentation and more men. Don't try running, Boone. It will go harder for you if you do. He mounted his horse with fluid grace. 1 week. Make peace with your fate. The agents wheeled their horses around and rode away, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. Claudine's legs trembled so badly she had to sit on the chopping stump. Sandro stood watching until the riders disappeared around the bend. They're lying, Claudine said, aren't they? Sandro turned to her, his face grave. Yes, but lies with power behind them can be deadlier than truth. Inside the cabin, they found Tenoch huddled in the corner, clutching Sandro's old Bible. The boy's dark eyes were wide with fear. Sandro knelt beside him, speaking soft words in Apache until some of the tension left the small shoulders. The day passed in a haze of worry. Claudine went through her usual tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending, but her hands shook, and she had to redo simple stitches multiple times. Sandro seemed preoccupied, checking his rifle, studying the horizon. Only Tenoch carried on normally, though he stayed closer to them than usual. Night fell, bringing no peace. Claudine lay in her bed, sleep eluding her despite her exhaustion. The moon cast silver patterns through the window, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to each other. She thought of Morris's sneering face, of the threat in his voice. The idea of Sandro being taken away, imprisoned or worse, made her chest ache. Unable to rest, she rose and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. Perhaps some warm milk would help. She opened her door quietly, not wanting to wake the others. Light spilled from beneath Sandro's door. She hesitated, then heard the scratch of pen on paper. Curious, she knocked softly. Come in, Sandro called. He sat at his small desk, a lamp burning low beside him. Papers were spread across the surface. Yellowed documents, carefully preserved letters, maps marked with neat annotations. He looked up as she entered, and Claudine saw weariness etched in the lines around his eyes. Couldn't sleep either, he asked, and she shook her head. What are you doing? Sandro gestured to the papers, gathering proof. Been collecting it for years, waiting for the right time? Claudine moved closer, peering at the documents. She saw land deeds, written testimonies, letters in both English and Apache script. Proof of what? Of where I was when those surveyors died, of who really killed them. He picked up one paper, holding it carefully. This is a statement from Chief Standing Bear's son, witnessing me trading furs 2 valleys away that week. This one, he indicated another document, is from a Methodist circuit rider who shared my campfire those same days. You've been preparing for this, Claudine said softly. Sandro nodded. The railroad's been trying to drive me off this land for years. First, they killed my wife and son, claiming it was renegade natives. When that didn't make me leave, they started spreading rumors about me being dangerous, unstable. Now they've manufactured these murder charges. His voice held old pain, but no surprise. I knew someday they'd make their move. Why didn't you tell me before? Didn't want to burden you with old troubles, he looked at her directly. You've had enough of your own. Claudine sat in the room's other chair, drawing her shawl tighter. What will you do? Not run. His voice was firm. Running looks like guilt. I'll face them with the truth. These papers, these witnesses. The railroad thinks they can bury anyone who stands in their way. But sometimes the small and quiet things endure, while the mighty fall. She studied his face in the lamplight, the scars, the silver in his beard, the steady courage in his eyes. This was not a murderer's face. This was the face of a man who had suffered great wrongs, yet kept his humanity intact. "I'll stand with you," she said quietly. "My word may not carry weight in their courts, but I know what I know. You are a good man, Sandro Boone." Something softened in his expression. "Much obliged, Miss Claudine. That means more than you might guess." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the lamp flickering, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the coyotes had gone quiet, and only the soft whisper of wind in the pines could be heard. "We should try to rest," Sandro finally said. "Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." Claudine rose but paused at the door. "Sandro?" "Yes?" "Thank you for giving me a home, for treating me with respect when others wouldn't." Her voice caught slightly. "Whatever comes, I'm glad to be here." She closed the door before he could respond, not trusting herself to say more. Back in her own room, she lay down, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The worry was still there, but somehow lighter, shared between two hearts instead of weighing on one alone. Sleep came eventually, as it always does, but through the rest of the night the lamp burned in Sandro's room as he continued his careful work, gathering truth to stand against lies, preparing to defend not just his own life, but the fragile family that had formed beneath his roof. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the sky in strokes of pale pink and gold. Claudine moved quietly through the cabin, wrapping cornbread and dried meat in cloth. Her hands trembled as she packed food and water into Sandro's old leather satchel. Just in case, she told herself, just in case they needed to leave quickly. The cabin felt different in the gray morning light, tenser as if the very walls held their breath. Tenoch sat cross-legged by the window, his dark eyes scanning the trail below. He hadn't spoken since the agent's visit yesterday, but his watchful presence was a comfort. Sandro emerged from his room, his face lined with exhaustion. He'd been up most of the night, organizing his proof into careful stacks. Now the papers lay bundled on the table, tied with twine. Years of collected testimony waiting to speak their truth. "There's coffee," Claudine said softly, pouring him a cup. The tin mug rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "Much obliged." His voice was rough with fatigue. He took a sip, then gestured to the packed satchel. "We're not running, Miss Claudine." "I know, but we should be prepared just the same." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. They shared a quiet breakfast, the morning sun slowly filling the cabin with light. Tenoch joined them at the table, picking at his food. The boy's shoulders were tight with anxiety. The peace shattered with the thunder of hooves. Tenoch leaped up, pressing against the window. "Riders," he whispered, "many?" Claudine's heart lurched as she counted the approaching horsemen, 6 of them, armed with rifles. Morris led the group, a cruel smile visible even at a distance. "Get back from the windows," Sandro ordered, rising. He moved to stand by the door, straight-backed and calm. "Whatever happens, stay inside." "Sandro," Claudine started, but the words died in her throat as boots thundered on the porch. The door burst open with a crash. Morris filled the doorway, flanked by 2 men with drawn revolvers. "Sandro Boone," he announced with satisfaction. "You're under arrest for the murder of 3 railroad surveyors." "Your writ still ain't legal," Sandro said quietly. Morris's smile widened. "Oh, but it is." He pulled a paper from his coat, fresh-looking with a red seal clearly visible. Signed by the territorial marshal himself. "Now, are you coming peaceful-like, or do we do this the hard way?" Sandro's eyes flicked to where Claudine stood, clutching Tenoch. His shoulders dropped slightly. "I'll come quiet." "Wise choice," Morris gestured to his men. "Search the cabin. Take any papers you find." "No," Claudine cried as 2 men pushed past her, roughly pulling drawers open, dumping their contents. "Those are his proof of innocence." One of the men reached for the bundle of testimonies on the table. Sandro moved to stop him, and Morris's fist crashed into his jaw. Sandro staggered, and the other men descended on him like wolves. "Stop it!" Claudine screamed as they beat him, kicks landing with sickening thuds. Please. He wasn't resisting. Tenoch buried his face in her skirts, trembling. Papers flew through the air as the men ransacked the cabin, landing scattered and crumpled on the floor. The careful organization of years destroyed in moments. Morris watched with satisfaction as his men dragged Sandro to his feet. Blood trickled from the mountain man's split lip, but his eyes remained steady, defiant. Shackle him, Morris ordered. Wouldn't want our dangerous murderer getting any ideas on the ride to town. The chains clinked as they locked around Sandro's wrists and ankles. The sound cut through Claudine like a knife. This was wrong, all wrong. This gentleman who'd given her dignity, who played hymns on his flute and taught a scared Apache boy to snare rabbits, he was no killer. You can't do this, she protested, stepping forward. He's innocent. I know him. Ah, yes, Morris drawled. The two-bit bride speaks up for her purchaser. Tell me, madam, how do you think that little arrangement will play in court? The murderer who bought himself a woman at auction? He laughed nastily. Your testimony will be worth less than nothing. Heat flooded Claudine's face, but she held her ground. The truth will come out. The truth? Morris kicked at the scattered papers. The truth is whatever the railroad says it is. Best accept that now. He turned to his men. Get him on his horse. We're riding to town. They half-dragged, half-pushed Sandro outside. The chains made it difficult for him to mount, but they showed no patience, roughly shoving him into the saddle. His horse shifted nervously, sensing its rider's distress. Claudine hurried onto the porch, Tenoch still clinging to her skirts. The morning sun caught the chains binding Sandro's hands, making them gleam like snake scales. Don't worry about the cabin, Sandro called to her. Everything you need, dash. A rifle butt slammed into his ribs, cutting off his words. Shut up, Morris snapped. You can say goodbye to your woman at the gallows. The riders wheeled their horses around, Morris taking the lead rope attached to Sandro's mount. As they started down the trail, Sandro managed to turn in the saddle. His eyes met Claudine's, warm brown eyes that had looked at her with kindness when the world showed only scorn. Then the riders rounded the bend, and he was gone. Claudine's legs gave way. She sank to the porch steps, tears flowing freely now. Tenoch pressed against her side, his small body shaking with silent sobs. Don't let them take him forever, the boy whispered in English. The words he'd been learning from her primer now carried his deepest fear. She pulled him close, stroking his dark hair. We won't, she promised. We won't let them take him. When the dust had settled and the sound of hooves had faded, Claudine wiped her eyes and stood. There was work to be done. She went back inside, her heart aching at the destruction. Drawers hung open, furniture overturned, Sandro's precious books scattered across the floor. She began gathering the papers, smoothing each crumpled sheet with trembling hands. These were more than just documents. They were Sandro's hope for justice, carefully collected over years of patience. Letters from Apache elders, testimony from traders and travelers, carefully drawn maps showing where he'd been when the surveyors died. Help me, child, she said to Tenoch. We must save every piece. Together they collected the scattered proof, stacking it carefully on the table. Some pages were torn, others muddy from boots, but most were still readable. Claudine would organize them again, just as carefully as Sandro had. She wouldn't let him hang for a lie. She might be just a fat old spinster who'd been sold for 25 cents, but she knew truth from falsehood. She knew the heart of the man who'd given her a home when others gave only mockery. Looking at the pile of rescued papers, Claudine felt steel enter her spine. The railroad thought they could bury anyone who stood in their way, but sometimes the small and quiet things endured, while the mighty fell. She turned to Tenoch, who watched her with solemn eyes. We have work to do, she said firmly. Your father needs us. The boy's eyes widened at the word father, then filled with fierce determination. He nodded once, sharply. Outside, the sun climbed higher, promising another beautiful Colorado day. But in the cabin, Claudine and Tenoch bent over their task, sorting papers, preparing to fight for the man who'd made them a family. The evening shadows lengthened across Sandro's cabin floor as Claudine lit the kerosene lantern with trembling hands. Its warm glow pushed back the growing darkness, but couldn't dispel the hollow ache in her chest. Tench sat huddled by the hearth, his small frame tense with worry. He hadn't spoken since the railroad men had taken Sandro away. Claudine placed the lantern on the rough-hewn table where they'd shared so many meals. The scattered papers she'd gathered lay in neat stacks beside it, testament to Sandro's years of careful documentation. She touched them gently, then sank to her knees beside her chair. "Dear Lord," she began, her voice quavering in the quiet cabin. "I ain't much for fancy prayers, but I need your strength now." She clasped her hands tighter, feeling the calluses from recent work. "Please watch over Sandro in that jail cell. Keep him safe until we can prove his innocence." Tenoch lifted his head, watching her with solemn eyes as she continued. "And Lord, give me the courage to face those townfolk who've mocked me all these years. Help me find the words to speak truth to power." Her voice grew stronger. "Not for my sake, Lord, but for Sandro's. For this boy who needs his father for justice. Amen," she finished softly. The word hung in the air, filled with both prayer and promise. Rising from her knees, Claudine moved to the stove where she'd kept soup warming. "Come eat, child," she called to Tenoch. "We need our strength for tomorrow." The boy approached cautiously like a wild creature. He'd begun to trust them over the past weeks, but Sandro's violent removal had awakened old fears. Claudine ladled the soup into 2 bowls, adding extra meat to his portion. "Sandro will return," she said firmly, meeting the boy's dark eyes. "I promise you that. But first we must help him." Tenoch nodded slightly, picking up his spoon. They ate in silence, the cabin eerily quiet without Sandro's steady presence. No hymn singing tonight, no gentle flute melodies drifting on the evening air. After supper, Claudine tucked Tenoch into Sandro's bed, wrapping him in the colorful blanket she'd begun piecing together from scraps. The boy clutched it tight, his eyes huge in the lantern light. "Sleep now," she soothed. "Tomorrow we ride to town." She stayed awake long into the night, organizing Sandro's papers and preparing for the confrontation ahead. The testimonies painted a clear picture. Sandro had been miles away when the surveyors died, trading with peaceful Apache bands. But would anyone listen to an old spinster and her evidence? Dawn broke crisp and clear, painting the mountains gold. Claudine had already been up for hours, packing food and water for the journey. She'd wrapped Sandro's precious documents carefully in oilcloth, protecting them from dust and damp. "Time to go, child," she called softly to Tenoch. The boy was already awake, dressed in the clothes she'd sewn him. He helped her feed the chickens and secure the cabin, moving with quiet efficiency. Hitching the wagon proved challenging. Claudine had watched Sandro do it many times, but her fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar straps. Finally, she managed to get everything secured. She lifted Tenoch onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside him, gathering the reins in her work-roughened hands. "Giddy up," she commanded, and the horses moved forward. Dust rose behind them as they headed down the mountain trail, the wagon wheels jolting over rocks and ruts. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another hot day. Claudine felt every bump and jostle as they descended toward town. The journey seemed longer than ever before, though she'd made it several times now with Sandro. Her back ached from the hard seat, but she pressed on, determined. Beside her, Tenoch sat silent and watchful, scanning the landscape with the keen eyes of his people. They passed other travelers on the road, a family in a loaded wagon heading west, a pair of cowboys driving cattle, a traveling peddler with his mule cart. All gave Claudine and the Apache boy curious, sometimes hostile looks. She held her head high, refusing to shrink from their stares. The sun stood directly overhead when they finally rolled into town. Claudine's heart pounded as they passed the familiar buildings, the general store where people had refused to serve them, the church that had rejected their presence. Dust swirled in the street, and the heat waves rose from the wooden sidewalks. They stopped first at the livery stable, where Claudine paid extra to ensure their horses would be properly cared for. The stableman's eyes widened when she produced coins from her pocket. Clearly, he'd heard about her being purchased for 25 cents. "The horses need water and good feed," she said firmly, ignoring his expression. "We may be here a while." Leading Tenoch by the hand, she walked down the main street toward the sheriff's office. People stopped to stare. Women whispered behind their hands. Men turned their backs. A group of children pointed at Tenoch and giggled until their mother hurried them away. Outside the mercantile, Claudine overheard 2 women talking. Can you believe they locked up Bearclaw? About time, if you ask me. Always knew he was a killer. And that fat old maid living with him, shameless, bringing that savage child to town too. Claudine's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. The boy's small hand tightened in hers. She squeezed back gently, trying to convey strength she wasn't sure she possessed. The jail stood at the end of the street, a solid building of red brick with barred windows. Claudine took a deep breath, straightening her spine. The oilcloth package of documents felt heavy in her other hand, but she clutched it like a shield. "Ready?" she asked Tenok softly. The boy nodded, his face set in lines too serious for his young years. Together, they climbed the steps to the jail's wooden porch. Claudine's heart thundered in her chest as she reached for the door handle. Inside, the air was cooler but thick with the smell of tobacco and unwashed bodies. Sheriff Tom Ridley sat at his desk, writing in a ledger. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face showing surprise. "Miss Wells," he said, setting down his pen, "didn't expect to see you here." "Sheriff." Claudine's voice came out steadier than she'd feared. "I've come about Sandro Boone." Ridley's expression closed. Nothing to discuss there. He's locked up awaiting trial for murder. Railroad's bringing in a circuit judge next week. "He's innocent," Claudine said firmly. She placed the oilcloth package on his desk. "I have proof." The sheriff eyed the package without touching it. "Miss Wells, I understand you feel some obligation to the man, given your situation. But this is a serious matter. 3 men are dead. And Sandro didn't kill them." Claudine began unwrapping the documents. "These papers show exactly where he was when those surveyors died. There are testimonies from Apache elders, traders, even a Army Scout dash." "The word of savages and mountain men won't stand against the railroad's evidence," Ridley interrupted. Tenok stiffened beside her at the word savages. Claudine laid a calming hand on his shoulder. "Truth is truth, Sheriff," she said quietly. "Will you at least look at the papers? Or are you more afraid of the railroad than you are of hanging an innocent man?" Ridley's face reddened. For a moment, Claudine thought he would order them out, but something in her steady gaze made him hesitate. Finally, he reached for the documents. "I'll look them over," he said gruffly. "No promises. That's all I ask." Claudine paused. "May we see him?" The sheriff considered, then nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes, Jones, he called to his deputy. "Take them back to Boone's cell." The deputy led them down a short corridor to the cell block. The air grew mustier, heavy with the smell of old straw and human misery. Tenoch pressed closer to Claudine's side. Sandro sat on a narrow cot in the last cell, his big frame making the space seem even smaller. His face was bruised from yesterday's beating, but his eyes lit up when he saw them. "Claudine," he said softly, "you shouldn't have come." "Hush." She gripped the iron bars, fighting back tears at seeing him caged like an animal. "Of course we came. I've brought your papers. The sheriff's looking at them now." Sandro shook his head. "The railroad won't let truth stop them. You should take the boy and go somewhere safe." "No." Claudine's voice was firm. "We're your family now, Sandro Boone. We won't abandon you." Tenoch pressed against the bars, reaching his small hand through. Sandro clasped it gently. "Be strong, little brother," he said in Apache. "Take care of our mother." The deputy cleared his throat. "Time's up." Claudine wanted to protest, but she knew it would do no good. "We'll be back," she promised. "Keep faith." As they walked back to the sheriff's office, she held her head high despite the curious stares from townsfolk who'd gathered outside. Let them look. Let them whisper. She was no longer the woman they could shame, with cruel jokes and mockery. She had found her family, and she would fight for it with everything she had. Sheriff Ridley sat at his desk, thumbing through Sandro's documents with deliberate slowness. The afternoon light slanted through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the office floor. Claudine stood before him, her hands clasped tightly to keep them from trembling. "These papers," Ridley said finally, "might tell a pretty tale, Miss Wells. But the railroad's got signed affidavits from respectable men. Their surveyors were found dead, and Boone was seen in the area." "Those affidavits are lies," Claudine said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I want to testify at the trial. I know Sandro's character. The sheriff leaned back in his creaking chair. A woman in your situation might not make the most convincing witness. Living unmarried with a man who bought you for 2 bits? The railroad's lawyers would tear you apart? Heat rose in Claudine's cheeks. Beside her, Tenok shifted closer, his small hand finding hers. The touch steadied her. I don't care what they say about me, she declared. I know the truth. Sandro is a good man. He saved me from humiliation that day, showed me nothing but respect. Those railroad men are the real criminals, killing his wife and child, then framing him for murder. Ridley's weathered face showed a flicker of sympathy. Maybe so. But my job is to keep order, not fight the railroad. They're bringing in Judge Wilson next week. He usually sides with progress, if you take my meaning. Then I'll speak to the judge, Claudine insisted. I'll tell him everything. The sheriff sighed. Your choice, Miss Wells, but don't say I didn't warn you. Deputy Jones led them back to Sandro's cell. The mountain man's face was dark with bruises, but his eyes blazed when Claudine told him her plan. No, he growled. I won't have you destroying yourself for me. The railroad plays dirty. They'll crush you just for spite. Claudine gripped the iron bars. They already tried crushing me, Sandro. For years I let people mock me, shame me, make me feel worthless. But you showed me I have value. Now it's my turn to stand up for what's right. Claudine, his large scarred hand covered hers on the bars. You don't owe me anything. This isn't about owing, she said softly. It's about family. You and the boy. You're all I have now. I won't let them take that away without a fight. Sandro's eyes grew damp. He squeezed her hand, then reached through to touch Tenoch's shoulder. Watch over her little brother, he murmured in Apache. The boy nodded solemnly. The deputy cleared his throat. Sun's setting, you'll need to find lodging for the night. Claudine straightened her spine. We'll be back tomorrow, Sandro. Keep praying. The boarding house stood 3 blocks from the jail, a tall wooden building with peeling white paint. The proprietor, Mrs. Hendricks, pursed her lips at the sight of Claudine and the Apache boy, but couldn't refuse their money. One night, she said curtly, top floor back room and keep that child quiet. They climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs to a small room with slanted walls and a single iron bed. The mattress was thin, but clean. A cracked wash basin stood beneath a tiny window that overlooked the alley behind the building. Claudine helped Tenoch wash his face and hands, then shared the bread and cheese she'd packed. As they ate, whispers drifted through the thin walls from the next room. Can you believe the nerve? Bringing that savage child here. Well, what do you expect from a woman who sold herself to Bear Claw? Probably been living in sin all along. Tenoch's shoulders hunched at the cruel words. Claudine pulled him close, smoothing his dark hair. Pay them no mind, little one, she murmured. Their words can't hurt us unless we let them. She took out her worn Bible, the one possession she'd brought from her old life. Together, they knelt beside the narrow bed. Dear Lord, Claudine prayed softly. Watch over Sandro tonight in that cold cell. Give him strength and courage. Help us all remember that you see the truth in our hearts, no matter what others may say. And thank you for bringing us together as a family, strange as we may seem to others. Amen. Amen, Tenoch whispered. He looked up at her with serious eyes. Will they hurt Sandro like they hurt my parents? Claudine's heart clenched. Not if I can help it, she promised. Now try to sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. The boy curled up on the bed while Claudine sat in the room's single chair, keeping watch through the night. She took out Sandro's letters, reading them again by moonlight. Land deeds, testimonies from traders and tribal elders, carefully preserved documents that told the true story of the railroad's greed and violence. She memorized every detail, preparing herself for the trial ahead. Dawn came too soon, painting the small window with pale light. Claudine dressed carefully in her plainest brown dress, freshly brushed and mended. She helped Tenoch put on the clean shirt she'd sewn him, combing his hair until it shone. The courthouse bell began tolling as they descended the boarding house stairs. Mrs. Hendricks watched them leave with suspicious eyes, but Claudine held her head high. Outside, townspeople were already gathering, drawn by the prospect of spectacle. The courthouse stood in the town square, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun. Claudine clutched Sandro's letters like a shield as she climbed the steps, Tenoch close beside her. Inside, the high-ceilinged room smelled of polish and tension, Railroad men in expensive suits sat at one table, their lawyer arranging papers with precise movements. At the other table, Sandro sat slumped between two deputies, his wrists shackled. He looked up as Claudine entered, his eyes pleading with her to leave. She squared her shoulders and took a seat in the front row, settling Tenoch beside her. The boy's small face was solemn as church bells continued their somber toll. The room filled quickly with curious townsfolk. Claudine felt their stares like physical things, heard their whispers hissing like snakes. But she kept her gaze forward, focused on the empty judge's bench. A door opened and everyone rose as Judge Wilson entered, his black robes swirling. He was a thin man with sharp features and cold eyes. He surveyed the crowded room before taking his seat. "The Territory Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The case of the Railroad Commission versus Sandro Boone, charged with the murder of 3 railroad surveyors." Claudine gripped the letters tighter, drawing strength from the truth they contained. Whatever came next, she would not let Sandro face it alone. She was no longer the woman who could be shamed into silence. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, making the courtroom glow like a church. But today's service would not be about mercy. It would be about justice. And Claudine Wells was ready to testify. The railroad's lawyer rose first, presenting 3 rough-looking men in dusty clothes. Each testified with practiced words about seeing Sandro gun down surveyors in cold blood. When Claudine's name was called, snickers echoed through the courtroom. She gripped her skirts, walking to the stand with small, careful steps. Someone coughed, "whore," behind a hand. But as she began speaking, her voice found strength. "I've seen Sandro's true nature," she declared. "He took me in with nothing but respect. The same man who reads scripture each night didn't murder anyone." Her hands trembled less as she lifted Sandro's papers. These letters prove the railroad killed his Apache wife and son, then stole their land. They're the real criminals here. Reading aloud, her clear voice carried damning evidence. Several jurors leaned forward, frowning. Judge Wilson's stern expression wavered. "I was sold for 25 cents, Claudine concluded, meeting the judge's gaze. "But Sandro bought me with honor. Will you condemn honor today?" The courtroom fell silent as a tomb. After a tense recess, Pastor Reeves shuffled to the front of the courtroom, his shoulders bent as if carrying a great weight. "I can stay silent no longer," he announced, his voice quavering. "The railroad men threatened my church if I spoke up, but Miss Wells has shown me true Christian courage." The pastor's words fell like stones in still water, as he described witnessing railroad agents harassing Sandro's Apache family years ago. "I heard their threats. I saw the smoke from their torches. And God forgive me, I said nothing when they blamed Sandro for those deaths." Outside the courthouse, Claudine and the boy sat on a wooden bench, holding hands tightly. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as the jury deliberated. The boy whispered prayers in Apache while Claudine's lips moved in silent supplication. As dusk painted the sky purple, the bailiff called them back inside. The foreman stood, paper trembling in his hands. "We find the defendant not guilty." Sandro's legs gave way. He sank into his chair, tears streaming down his weathered face. Claudine rushed forward, gripping his calloused hand in both of hers. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as the feared mountain man wept openly, finally cleared of murder. The railroad agents stormed from the courthouse, boots thundering against wooden floors, their power broken for now. The wagon wheels creaked softly as they made their way home under a star-filled sky. Sandro held the lantern high, its golden light swaying across the familiar trail. Tenoch sat between them on the seat, his small shoulders finally relaxed. When they reached the cabin, they found surprises waiting. On the porch sat baskets and bundles, gifts from neighbors whose hearts had been changed by the trial. Claudine's hands trembled as she unwrapped each one. Sacks of flour, thick wool blankets, and even 3 plump chickens pecking in a wooden crate. "Look what the Lord has provided," she whispered, tears glinting in the lamplight. Sandro cleared his throat, taking her work-worn hand in his. "Miss Claudine Wells," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Before God and any who care to hear, I claim you as my bride, pure and honorable as the day you came to my home." Color rose in Claudine's cheeks, but she stood straighter, pride replacing decades of shame. Inside, they gathered around their table, sharing a simple supper of bread and stew. Tenoch pressed close to Claudine's side, his quiet laughter joining theirs as peace settled over their unlikely family. Snow drifted against the cabin walls like thick white cotton, while inside, warmth and life filled every corner. Claudine's strong hands worked the bread dough with practiced motions, the thump-thump of her kneading keeping time with Sandro's steady axe strikes outside. The scent of yeast and pine smoke mingled in the air. "And the Lord said unto Moses," Tenoch read carefully from the worn Bible, his finger tracing each word. Claudine smiled at his progress, remembering the frightened boy who had hidden in the brush months ago. As evening settled, they gathered around the rough-hewn table. Steam rose from bowls of rabbit stew, the lamplight casting golden shadows on their faces. Sandro's deep voice led them in, "Amazing Grace," Claudine's alto joining softly, while Tenoch hummed along. Wolves called in the darkness beyond their walls, their howls echoing off the mountainsides. But here, inside their sanctuary, peace reigned. Claudine's heart swelled as she looked at her unlikely family. She reached across the table and took Sandro's scarred hand in hers. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for bringing beauty from ashes." Through the frosted window, their cabin's light shone like a beacon against the vast night, a testament to mercy's power to heal and transform. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.